There is a silence that precedes the truth, not the silence of ignorance, but of waiting, as though the soul itself is holding its breath. You who sit before me today, you who have come, not to be entertained, but to be seen, you have felt this silence within your own depths. It is the silence that dwells in the forgotten chambers of childhood, where the earliest gods and monsters of our psyche were born. You have come to speak of love, conditional love, that most subtle poison which seeps into the bloodline of generations, altering not only the heart, but the very architecture of the soul. When love is conditional, it teaches the child not how to be, but how to perform. It whispers, you are worthy only if, and thus the original wound is opened. This is not merely psychological, it is archetypal. The child, like the hero of myth, is thrust into exile from the garden, that paradise of unconditional acceptance, and must wander through the wilderness of the self in search of the lost wholeness. In this exile, one learns to wear masks, to hide the divine spark beneath the garments of approval, achievement, obedience. But in doing so, one loses contact with the primordial source, the self, the eternal center of being. Many of you have mistaken adaptation for love. You believed that pleasing the parent was connection, that obedience was safety. But in truth, the psyche remembers every betrayal of its own authenticity. Each moment you silenced your natural joy or suppressed your anger to maintain affection. You carved another mark upon the soul, an inherited wound, and these wounds do not die with one generation. They pass down like the shadow of an unspoken curse, from mother to daughter, father to son, whispering in dreams, manifesting in patterns of relationship, addiction, or spiritual emptiness. You may ask, how does such a wound persist? It persists because it is never seen. What is not brought to consciousness continues to live in us as fate. The unlived life of the parent becomes the burden of the child. The child inherits not the wealth of the ancestors, but their unresolved longing, their shame, their silence. Thus, the family becomes a psychic organism where invisible loyalties bind souls together, often against their own becoming. There is a certain moment in life, what I have called individuation, when the soul begins to rebel against this inheritance. It is not rebellion in the political sense, but in the alchemical sense, a rebellion of the inner world against the tyranny of the mask. The outer personality, the ego, trembles as the unconscious rises like a flood, demanding to be acknowledged. It comes through dreams, through inexplicable moods, through the haunting feeling that one's life is somehow not one's own. The psyche is attempting to restore wholeness, to bring the lost child, the divine child, back into communion with the self. Conditional love fractures the soul into two: the one who was loved for being good, and the one who was exiled for being real. The work of analysis and of spiritual healing is to reconcile these two, to allow the exiled one to speak to cry, to rage, and to finally be embraced. It is not enough to understand this intellectually. The intellect is a servant, not a master, of transformation. True healing occurs when the heart, trembling, turns toward its own darkness without judgment. Only then can love become unconditional again, not as a moral idea, but as a lived experience of the self. I remember a patient, a young woman whose mother loved her fiercely, but only when she was successful. When she failed, the mother withdrew, silent and cold. The girl grew into a woman who achieved much, yet every success tasted of ashes. In her dreams, she saw herself climbing a mountain of mirrors, but every reflection was hollow-eyed. One night she dreamt she found a small child locked in a room, crying, surrounded by drawings she had once made and forgotten. The door was bolted from the inside. That child was the real self, abandoned in pursuit of conditional love. The work of therapy was not to open the door for her, but to help her realize that she was both the child and the one who held the key. The psyche does not forget. The wounds of childhood are not events that lie in the past. They are living energies in the unconscious, shaping the present. They manifest as the shadow, that constellation of qualities we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. But the shadow is not evil. It is the carrier of the lost vitality. It holds the spontaneity, the passion, the creativity that we sacrifice to earn approval, to encounter. The shadow is terrifying, for it means confronting everything we have denied. Yet only by embracing the shadow can we become whole. Conditional love teaches us that our value depends on something outside ourselves. It creates a psychic economy where worth must be earned, never simply possessed. In such a system, even love becomes a form of control, the currency of emotional survival. This is why so many relationships repeat the same ancient pattern. The longing to be seen met by the fear of being seen. The lover becomes the parent. The beloved becomes the child, and the cycle of dependency and disappointment renews itself. To break this cycle, one must descend into the underworld of the soul, where the ghosts of our ancestors await acknowledgement. This descent is not merely therapeutic, it is spiritual. It mirrors the myth of Inanna, who descended into the underworld, stripped of all her garments, her titles, her powers, her adornments, until she stood naked before her dark sister. That sister is the shadow, the repressed aspect of the soul. Only when Inanna embraced her and died to her old identity could she be reborn. In the same way, the individual who faces their inherited wounds must die symbolically to the persona, to the conditional self that was constructed to survive love, that was never free. In our modern world, we imagine that consciousness alone is enough. We think that if we understand our childhood, if we can name our traumas, we are free. But freedom is not knowledge, it is transformation. The intellect cannot redeem what the heart refuses to feel. True liberation comes only when the soul reclaims its pain as sacred material, as the very matter of its becoming. This is what the alchemists knew, that the lead of suffering, if held in the fire of awareness, becomes gold. Love, when it is conditional, wounds, but paradoxically, that wound can become the portal through which the soul enters its own mystery. For the wound exposes the illusion of separateness. It shows us that what we seek outside is already within. The task is to love the wounded child within us, not with pity, but with reverence, to say to it, "You were always worthy," to reclaim what was denied, and in doing so, to end the lineage of conditional love. And so, my friends, we descend further not into despair, but into the depths where the roots of being intertwined with the mysteries of love and pain. You see, the psyche is not merely a record of personal memory, it is a vast landscape where ancestral spirits still breathe. When you weep over a wound that seems to be yours, perhaps it is not yours alone. Perhaps you are feeling the tears of those who came before you, those who could not weep, who turned their pain into silence so that you might live. The unconscious does not recognize the boundaries of generations. It speaks through the blood, through the images of dreams, through the strange repetition of fate. This is why the same patterns haunt families for centuries, not as punishment, but as unfinished stories yearning for completion. The conditional love of the parent becomes the invisible law of the lineage. A father who was unloved becomes a man who demands perfection. A mother who was unseen becomes a woman who smothers with care, mistaking control for tenderness. And the child, absorbing these distorted mirrors, learns to confuse love with fear, acceptance with conformity. Thus, a subtle covenant is made between the generations, an unconscious agreement that pain shall be inherited until it is finally made conscious. The curse is not in the events themselves, but in the blindness that perpetuates them. To awaken is to break that covenant, but awakening is not gentle. It begins with disorientation, the feeling that everything familiar is dissolving. The ego resists, clinging to its old definitions, to its moralities, to its stories of right and wrong. Yet the unconscious is indifferent to such categories. It demands truth, not comfort. When you begin to see that your love was conditional, you also see how you yourself have loved conditionally, how you have withheld affection from your own inner life, demanding from yourself the same obedience once demanded of you. To heal, therefore, is not to accuse the parent, but to recognize that both parent and child were prisoners of the same myth. I once had a dream, and perhaps it was not mine alone, but a dream of the collective soul. In it, I stood before an ancient house. The door was locked, but behind it I could hear a child's voice singing. The song was haunting, filled with both joy and sorrow. I tried to open the door, but it would not yield. Then I realized the key was in my pocket all along, yet I feared to use it. When I finally turned the key, The door opened onto an endless corridor of rooms, each filled with figures from different ages, all bearing the same face. They were my ancestors, each carrying a small wound upon the chest, each reaching towards the next in a silent plea for recognition. It was then I understood. To heal is to remember, not as history, but as presence. You are not merely individuals, you are intersections of time. In you, the unlived lives of your ancestors seek fulfillment. This is why healing one's own conditional love is an act of cosmic significance. When you forgive your parents not with sentimentality, but with understanding, you are forgiving centuries of human ignorance. You are liberating archetypal energies that have been bound in suffering. The gods themselves rejoice when one soul becomes conscious, for consciousness is the redemption of matter. But what, you may ask, is unconditional love? It is not indulgence, nor is it the sentimental warmth that passes for love in our age. Unconditional love is the gaze of the self, the eternal witness that sees without judgment. It is the light that illuminates the shadow without dispersing it, the love that can embrace both the saint and the sinner within. It is, in truth, the essence of the divine feminine, the Sophia, the eternal wisdom that accepts all opposites within her womb. Yet, to receive such love, one must first endure the darkness of its absence. The psyche must be emptied of false idols before it can receive the numinous. When I speak of the divine feminine, I do not refer to gender, but to a principle of being the principle of receptivity, of inner knowing, of creative fertility in the individual psyche. This principle has often been repressed under the dominance of the rational, the patriarchal, the controlling. Conditional love is born from this repression, for it replaces the living mystery with law. It seeks to possess what can only be received. To heal the wound of conditional love, one must restore this feminine element, must learn again to listen, to allow, to trust the wisdom of the soul. Only then does the inner marriage, the union of anima and animus become possible. You see, every act of love that is true is an alchemical operation. It transforms both lover and beloved, turning base emotions into spiritual gold. But when love is conditional, the alchemy fails. The soul remains divided, and the projections that might have led to wholeness turn to chains. This is why relationships so often become battlegrounds. They are the arenas where our unconscious contents seek expression. The partner becomes the carrier of our unloved self, and thus the one we both desire and despise. We say, "You make me feel," but in truth, they only mirror what was already within. The work is not to change the other, but to reclaim the projection, to recognize that the beloved is our own soul in disguise. There are moments in life when the heart breaks, truly breaks, and the old world collapses. These moments, though unbearable, are sacred, for it is in the breaking that the light enters. The shattering of illusion is the beginning of individuation. The one who was loved conditionally must now learn to love without condition, beginning with oneself. This is not an act of egoic affirmation, but of humility before the mystery of being. It is to say, I am both darkness and light, both wound and healer. When this acceptance dawns, something ancient stirs within the soul, the remembrance of its divine origin. For the self has always loved you, even when no one else did. Do not be afraid of the darkness that arises when you turn inward. It is not there to destroy you, but to guide you. The shadow, once faced, becomes your ally. The pain, once accepted, becomes your teacher. The ancestors, once feared, become your guardians, and love, once conditional, becomes the song of the universe itself, a music that needs no approval to be beautiful. When I speak thus, I do not speak as a man of theories, but as one who has walked through his own darkness. I, too, have felt the terror of the abyss, the loneliness of the soul that no human love can satisfy. But I have also seen that in that abyss shines a star, the inner light, the self, which no wound can extinguish. That light is your inheritance, older than the pain, stronger than the conditioning. To live from that light is to know love not as possession, but as participation in the eternal dance of creation. Let us continue, for the spirit of this inquiry is inexhaustible. We have touched the wound and glimpsed the shadow. Now we must approach the mystery of transformation, that sacred process through which suffering becomes wisdom. You see, my friends, every human being carries within them the archetype of the wounded healer. This is not a poetic metaphor, it is a psychic reality. The healer archetype awakens only through suffering, for how could one guide others through the labyrinth unless one has walked it oneself? The wound initiates us into the knowledge of life's duality, that light and darkness, love and pain are not opposites, but complements, two halves of one cosmic pulse. Conditional love, in this sense, is the gate through which the soul must pass to rediscover the unconditional. We imagine that healing means to remove pain, but in truth, healing means to bring consciousness into pain, to let it speak. The wound, when embraced, reveals its hidden wisdom. It says, you have sought love from others because you have forgotten that love is your essence. In this moment of realization, the soul begins its alchemy. The lead of suffering is placed in the crucible of awareness. The fire of feeling refines it, and from the ashes emerges the gold of compassion. The alchemists called this the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, because it defies the instinct to avoid pain. Our instinct seeks pleasure, comfort, safety, yet the psyche's deeper instinct is toward wholeness, and wholeness requires the integration of pain. It is as though the self conspires with fate to bring us experiences that shatter our defenses, forcing us to confront what was repressed. Thus, conditional love though cruel, becomes the instrument of awakening. It drives us inward to seek that which cannot be taken away. I recall a man who came to me in despair. He had achieved everything the world admired: wealth, honor, admiration, yet he felt hollow, as though his life were made of glass. In his dreams, he wandered through empty cities, calling for someone who never answered. When we explored his childhood, he remembered his father's cold praise affection given only for excellence. "You must be the best." His father would say, "Then I will be proud." And so the boy became the best, but never became himself. He had mistaken perfection for love. In one dream, he stood before a vast furnace, feeding it with golden coins. The fire roared, but gave no warmth. When he stopped, a voice whispered, "Feed it your heart." This image, though terrifying, was the beginning of his transformation. He began to allow himself to feel, to grieve the boy who had never been loved for being imperfect. Through tears, he discovered something extraordinary, that beneath the pain was tenderness, an innocence untouched by all his striving. That was the gold. The furnace sought the heart, the soul, the self. The path of individuation is not a straight ascent. It is a spiral. Each time we return to the wound, we enter it more deeply, with greater awareness. The same pain repeats, but its meaning changes. This is the process of psychic refinement, the slow, sacred digestion of experience. The ego resists, for it fears dissolution, but the self, like an alchemist, watches patiently as the impurities burn away. To those who seek love, I say, you must first endure loneliness, for loneliness is the shadow of love, the proof of its absence within the psyche. If you can sit with loneliness without reaching outward for distraction, it will transform, it will reveal itself as solitude, a communion with your own depths. Then you will discover that what you called loneliness was merely the soul's longing for itself. Conditional love trains us to seek approval, to mirror others' desires, to become what is expected. But the soul's nature is wild. It cannot thrive in captivity. When the call of the self comes, it often appears as crisis, the collapse of a marriage, the loss of a career, the sudden emptiness of what once satisfied. This is not failure. It is initiation. The gods are demanding your authenticity. The false self must die for the true one to live. I once said that the gods have become diseases, and I meant it literally. When divine energies, the archetypes, are repressed, they manifest as neurosis, addiction, or obsession. The unacknowledged God demands worship through suffering. But when we turn toward the symptom and ask it what it wants, the God is appeased. The neurosis dissolves, and its energy becomes available for creation. This, too, is part of the alchemy. There is no healing without death. The old patterns must die, the pattern of earning love, of fearing rejection, of seeking worth in others' eyes. This death is often accompanied by despair, for the ego does not believe in rebirth. Yet beneath despair lies a sacred seed, waiting for the soil of surrender. When you no longer strive to be loved, you begin to be love. The energy that once went outward now turns inward, nourishing the soul. Then, slowly, the inner world flowers. In this flowering, you will meet figures of light and shadow, inner guides, ancestral presences, forgotten memories. They come not to confuse, but to teach. Listen to them as you would to dreams, for the psyche speaks in images, not in words. Every dream is a message from the self, a letter written in the language of symbols. Do not interpret too quickly. Let the image speak in its own time. Often it will reveal something far greater than the intellect can grasp. When you dream of the wounded child, the absent parent, the dark forest, or the lost home, know that these are not merely memories, they are living symbols of the journey toward wholeness. The child is your innocence. The forest is your unconscious. The home is your forgotten divine nature. To dream of them is to be called home. As we go deeper, you will notice that the boundaries between personal and collective blur. The pain you feel as abandonment echoes the ancient myth of exile from Eden, the fall from divine grace. Every human story is a variation of that myth, the search to return to the lost source. Yet the garden was never lost, only our awareness of it. The kingdom of heaven is within, said the Christ, and the Buddha echoed, look inward. The alchemists said the same. Visita interiora terrae rectificando in venis, occultum lapidem, visit the interior of the earth. And by rectifying, you will find the hidden stone, and the hidden stone is the self. The interior of the earth is your own unconscious, and the rectification, the purification, is the long, painful work of transforming conditional love into unconditional awareness. When you begin to love without demand, without fear, you enter into participation with the cosmos itself. Love becomes no longer an emotion, but an ontological state, the very fabric of existence. The mystics called this union conjunctio the sacred marriage of opposites. In psychological terms, it is the integration of shadow and light, masculine and feminine, ego and self. It is the realization that all divisions were illusions born of fear. This is the destiny of the human soul, to suffer, to awaken, to love. Every wound, every heartbreak, every exile serves this purpose. Do not curse your pain, it is the path itself. The ancestors could not complete it, but you can, and when you do, their spirits are freed. You redeem not only yourself, but the lineage, and so we arrive at the threshold, the place where all separations dissolve, where the personal and the divine, the wound and the wisdom, the suffering and the grace become one. It is here that the final act of the psyche unfolds not in triumph, but in surrender. For the soul, when it reaches this stage, no longer seeks to conquer its pain or to justify its history. It seeks only to understand, to see with the eyes of eternity. You must understand that the psyche's goal is not perfection, but wholeness. Perfection is a fantasy of the ego, a sterile imitation of divinity. Wholeness, by contrast, is the embrace of all, that you are the saint and the sinner, the light and the shadow, the child who was unloved and the adult who has learned to love. When you can hold these opposites within your heart without fleeing from either, then you have touched the numinous. Then love ceases to be conditional, because it has transcended the duality of worth and unworthiness. Many people imagine enlightenment as a radiant clarity, a blissful state without suffering. But the truth is more subtle. Enlightenment is the ability to suffer consciously. It is to stand in the midst of your own storm, neither denying nor drowning in it. It is to let the tempest of emotion pass through you while remaining rooted in the still center, the self. This center is not a concept. It is an experience. The living awareness that watches even as the world within and without changes. The unconditional love of the self is not sentimental, it is fierce. Like fire, it burns away illusions, attachments, pretenses. It is the love that strips you naked before your own soul and says, this is who you are beyond roles, beyond history, beyond the need to be good. When you experience such love, you realize that even your flaws were necessary, even your failures were teachers, even your pain was sacred, for without them, you could never have discovered what cannot be destroyed. You may ask, how does one live after such an awakening? The answer is paradoxical. One lives more simply, yet more deeply. The dramas of the ego lose their fascination. You no longer chase affection, nor fear rejection, for you see that love was never something to gain or lose. It was the ground of being itself. You begin to love others, not for what they give you, but because you are love. Compassion arises naturally, not as virtue, but as vision. You see the child within each person, the same frightened child who once sought approval, who still carries the wound of conditional love. You see their defenses, their pride, their cruelty, and you recognize them as masks born of pain, and you forgive not out of moral duty, but because you understand. In this understanding, the world changes. The trees, the rivers, the stars all become mirrors of the inner order. You sense that life itself is an act of love, that the cosmos is a living organism, dreaming itself through you. Every tear you have shed becomes a drop in the great ocean of becoming. Every joy, every sorrow is part of the divine play. You are no longer separate from it. This is the final reconciliation. The alchemical conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites in alchemical imagery, It is depicted as the marriage of the sun and the moon, the king and the queen, the spirit and the flesh. Psychologically, it is the moment when consciousness and the unconscious are no longer enemies, but partners in creation. The ego does not vanish, it becomes transparent, a vessel through which the light of the self shines into the world. Do not imagine this as a permanent state. The psyche moves in rhythms like the tides. One day you feel close to the divine, the next you are lost again in the old patterns. But now you know the difference. You know that even in loss, the self is near. You learn to trust the process, to let life shape you as the potter shapes clay. This trust is the essence of faith, not belief in dogma, but a living relationship with a mystery. Sometimes, as wir erwachen, we are seized by a strange melancholy. We realize how much of our life was spent in illusion, how many years we wore masks, how deeply we betrayed ourselves for love, yet even this sorrow is sacred. It is the mourning of the old self, the funeral of the false. Let it weep, let it grieve. The tears of awakening are the waters of rebirth, and then, from that silence, something new emerges, a joy without cause, a peace that does not depend on circumstance. This is not happiness in the usual sense, it is serenity, the stillness of the heart that knows its own vastness. You may still feel pain, but it no longer defines you. You may still fear, but it no longer rules you. You are free, not because the world has changed, but because your perception has. The great paradox of the psyche is that the very wound that separated you from love becomes the door through which love returns. This is the mystery of the wounded healer. You can guide others, not because you are flawless, but because you have walked through fire and found your soul intact. Your wound becomes your gift. Your vulnerability becomes your strength. You become a living bridge between suffering and meaning, between human frailty and divine wholeness. In dreams, this transformation often appears as the birth of a child, radiant, luminous, untouched by the past. That child is the symbol of the integrated self, the new consciousness born from the union of opposites. It is innocence restored, not by ignorance, but by wisdom. It knows that love is not something that can be earned or lost, because it is the very substance of being. When we see this, we cease to judge even those who wounded us. We realize they too were prisoners of conditional love, repeating what was done to them, asleep in the same dream of separation. Compassion arises not as condescension, but as recognition. You see the divine play of ignorance and awakening, of suffering and redemption, unfolding endlessly. And you smile not in detachment, but in quiet awe at the vastness of it all. If there is a message I would leave you with, it is this: do not seek to escape your wounds, enter them. They are the sanctuaries where your soul waits for you. Do not be ashamed of your need for love. That need is the imprint of the divine within you, the echo of the original unity. But learn to turn that longing inward to the eternal source from which all love flows. When you drink from that source, you will never thirst again. Remember, love was never conditional, only your awareness of it was. The sun does not choose upon whom to shine. The river does not decide who may drink. The self, like the divine, loves because it is love. And you, too, are that love forgotten for a time, but never lost. And perhaps, when the silence returns, the same silence with which we began, you will hear within it the faintest whisper, the voice of the soul saying, "Now I remember